بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا Muhammad وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. What is wrong with Brother Daniel Haqiqi? Why is he always criticizing people? Why is he criticizing ulama? Why can't he leave the ulama alone? Who is he? He's not an alim. Why can't he overlook their mistakes? Look at all the good that they're doing. Is he trying to bring down the ulama? I'm sure we've heard these criticisms of Brother Daniel many times. Especially recently, there's been a huge reaction to a video recently and a confrontation by Brother Daniel with an imam called Suhaib Webb. Basically what happened, Brother Daniel on his Muslim Skeptic YouTube channel, he released a video criticizing some problematic things that Suhaib Webb said. And so Suhaib Webb took exception to this and he openly challenged Brother Daniel that if you're a man, you come and face me face to face because you're lying about me. So Brother Daniel took up that challenge and he went to meet Suhaib Webb at the masjid, and there was a confrontation face-to-face confrontation between them and a discussion. Suhaib Webb asking him, why are you writing lies about me? And Brother Daniel defending his position why he made that video. And so now there's been an enormous reaction to this video and to this confrontation. And even Yasser Qadi released a post on his Facebook account praising Suhaib Webb and calling Brother Daniel a troublemaker because he's trying to bring down the ulama. Look at the ulama, they're doing so much good work, and here you are, you're not an alim, you're a troublemaker trying to bring down the ulama. And so there's been an enormous reaction, enormous commentary. So is what Brother Daniel, is what he is doing, is that problematic? Is it an issue? Is it an issue for him criticizing ulama? Should he just, stop criticizing them, the ulama, the giants of the da'wah? They've done so much good. Let's overlook their shortcomings. Look at everything that they've done. What have you done? There's something wrong with your methodology. It's problematic what you're always doing. This is the criticisms that Brother Daniel has been receiving. So this is the issue I want to deal with, inshallah. These criticisms that Brother Daniel is receiving and others brothers like him in exposing deviant views. And this work is absolutely fundamental and critical. Why? Because it's important that we protect Islam, because there's a threat upon the Muslims and Islam from within. We know the kuffar are a threat, and we know all the challenges and everything they're doing against Islam, and that is vital and important work, and it has to be dealt with. But at the same time, we cannot allow Islam to be corrupted from within. So when there are deviant views, liberal secular views from within the Muslims that are seeking to corrupt Islam, it is critical, whether they're imams or whoever they are, no matter how many followers that they have, it is critical that these issues are dealt with. And so this is not a negative thing. It's not Muslim infighting. It's not something that should be criticized. It is work that is essential. And we cannot just say these guys are imams, they've done so much good work, just overlook some of their shortcomings and look at the greater work that they're doing. No, we can't overlook their shortcomings. We can't just ignore the mistakes that they are making, because they are imams, because they are influential, they have hundreds of thousands, millions of followers. The views that they hold and that they are teaching the new generation of Muslims, these views are essential for the ummah. If these views are corrupt, if they are secular, if they are liberal, if they are changing Islam, then irrespective of these imams, how much knowledge they have, how many followers that they have, these views have to be exposed and they have to be dealt with. And so what Brother Daniel is doing, and other brothers like him, again, away from his methodology, but looking at the bigger picture, these views have to be dealt with and they have to be exposed. And I'll explain why. What exactly is happening? Why is it critical that this kind of work takes place? Basically, if you look back to 2001, when September 11th occurred, and we know the attacks on the Twin Towers and the aftermath of that, and the spotlight that came on Islam and the Muslims. And America and the West now deemed Islam to be the new threat. So what happened was America instantly initiated military invasions in the Muslim world of Iraq and Afghanistan and other actions all around the Muslim world. But at the same time, they realized that military intervention is not enough. We have to deal with Islam as a threat long term, not just short term. So what the American government does was it has certain think tanks that work for the government. They perform analysis and they present policies to the American government. And the American government chooses which policies to follow. One of these think tanks is the RAND Corporation. You can look them up. Capital R-A-N-D, RAND Corporation. And basically they performed analysis and they presented a policy to the American administration. Basically their plan was, look, they said, military intervention in the Muslim world is not enough. To deal with Islam as a threat, you have to deal with the religion itself. You have to change the religion itself. You have to change and reform Islam, just like Christianity and other religions were reformed until they became secular. So this was the plan. This is what the RAND Corporation's policy was, and this is what they presented to the American government, and this is what the American government has been following ever since. So on their website, I wanted to look at an excerpt and the highlighted area. This is the policy they came up with. They said the researchers recommended targeting 5 groups as potential building blocks for networks: liberal and secular Muslim academics and intellectuals, young moderate religious scholars, community activists, women's groups engaged in gender equality campaigns, and moderate journalists and writers. So the area I want to focus on in one of these groups that they chose, they highlighted, is young moderate religious scholars. Right? So their aim was to really, one of the policies that's really going to affect the Muslims is to use young moderate religious scholars that are secular, scholars that have been trained in a way that we want, that hold the views that we want, secular, liberal-minded, democratic scholars. These are the groups we want to target. Why? Because if somebody comes to you, a non-Muslim, with ideas, an academic or whoever, a learned person, you're going to reject his ideas. But when you put amongst the Muslims imams, and we know the Muslims, their respect for the scholars, their respect for imams, when you use the imams and you've corrupted their mind with secular, liberal, moderate Islam, then this is a way to gain legitimacy amongst the community, because the Muslims will listen to them, and slowly you can infiltrate the minds of the Muslims using these imams and using them to spread the secular liberal agenda. So to change the narrative, to change the tafsir of the verses, change the tafsir of the hadith, and so on and so forth. So this is a key group that they targeted: young moderate religious scholars. So their whole aim was, we need to create a moderate Islam. And what is a moderate Muslim? And again, looking at an excerpt from their site, in the highlighted area, they said the characteristics of moderate Muslims. Okay, so they said, for the purposes of this study, moderate Muslims are those who share the key dimensions of democratic culture. All right? So we want Muslims to accept democracy. We want them to set aside the Sharia. We don't want them to take the Quran literally anymore and talk about Sharia law and Islamic law. No. We want democratic Muslims. They take the Quran just as something for recital, for spiritual purposes, but set aside the laws in the Quran. We want you to follow democratic, secular laws. So this is one of the characteristics of moderate Muslims. So they said these include support for democracy, internationally recognized human rights, including gender equality, the whole issue of male, female, and equality between them, destroying the marital structure, freedom of worship, interfaith dialogue, that all religions are the same, that the religions shouldn't view each other as a threat. They said respect for diversity, okay, and we heard this all the time now. Islam is inclusive, and LGBTQ, and all of these discussions, right? Acceptance of non-sectarian sources of law and opposition to terrorism and other illegitimate forms of violence. So basically, if you believe in anything jihad or all the verses about jihad in the Quran and fighting, we want you to take them all away. This is all terrorism, all right? And you need to have opposition to this and believe there's no such thing as jihad. So these are the characteristics that they recognized of what they believe a moderate Muslim is. So this is the RAND Corporation's policy. They created a moderate version of Islam. They highlighted what the characteristics of moderate Muslims are. And one of the key groups that they want to use to infiltrate the Muslims and to get moderate Islam to gain legitimacy amongst the Muslims is to use young moderate Islamic scholars. So now that we've seen that this has been the policy that the RAND Corporation, a think tank that works for the American government, this is the policy they put forth for the American government. This is the policy they've been following for the last 20 years since September 11th, all right? An effort to change Islam, reform Islam from within, and get the Muslims to become moderate Muslims, to become democratic, secular, liberal, inclusive Muslims that put aside the Sharia, put aside the verses that in the Quran that talk about jihad, accept gender equality, accept inclusiveness, and so on and so forth. And who's going to push these ideas? The Imams. So now when we understand this narrative, then we understand in the last 20 years or so, these celebrity Imams that have appeared, they've been given a platform, they're built for them institutions, schools, masjid, they have millions, hundreds of thousands, millions of followers. And for the last 20 years, what's the message they've been preaching? Peace and love and inclusiveness, and Islam isn't against democracy, and Islam isn't against secularism, and we need to ally with the left, and so on and so forth. So now we can understand, now when we understand these Imams like Yasir Qadhi, like Umar Sulaiman, like Suhaib Webb, we understand why it is absolutely critical to deal and expose the ideas of these kinds of Imams. And if you look at their ideas, that you understand that this is the agenda that they've been pursuing. If you look at Hamza Yusuf, he has lecture after lecture dismissing the Khilafah, dismissing Islamic law, many times arguing that secularism doesn't conflict with Islam, that Islam doesn't have a structure for the state. Many times speaking about that Islam is not the only right religion. Others, Christians and Jews, they also can lay a claim. The interfaith dialogue, meeting with Jews, with rabbis and priests and so on and so forth. Yasir Qadhi, the endless problematic statements that he's made. The statements that he's made about allying with the LGBT community, calling for their rights so we can get our rights. The claims that he's made, statements that he's made about the Quran, about the Sharia, about the laws of Allah. He's got clear videos where he's called the laws of the Quran bizarre. That how are we going to implement them today? He's many times said that we need to have a discussion about reforming and changing the laws of the Quran to fit inside a modern secular states. How could these people be labeled Imams? These are views that if a normal Muslim carried, it's very problematic. Let alone an Imam calling the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran as bizarre, that they need to be reformed. There many times he's questioned, put doubts on the Quran. The issue of the ahruf, the modes of the recitation of the Quran and the qira'at. It's been publicized, his doubts around the Quran, and when he went to Yale, how these doubts grew inside him, got him questioning what narrative have we been taught about the ahruf and the qira'at. Is there something wrong with the Quran? How could an Imam hold any of these views? Umar Sulaiman, he got up in US Congress and he did the opening prayer for US Congress, and he called America our nation. It's unimaginable that any Imam with any kind of knowledge could stand up in a US Congress and make dua for that Congress and make dua for America as a nation. It's unimaginable that Umar Sulaiman, his website, Yaqeen Institute, that they can have articles pushing forth evolution as a legitimate idea and it doesn't contradict the Quran. How is that possible? Or his many statements about allying with the LGBT, or his many statements about supporting politicians like Ilhan Omar. Ilhan Omar called the Sharia barbaric. Or the many protests that he's attended, and we know that famous incident where he performed that water ritual, a ritual of shirk, and he came out later and said, apologize, I didn't know. How could you not know? It's unimaginable for any of these Imams. If a Muslim held these kinds of views, it's problematic. Let alone Imams espousing borderline, some kufr and borderline kufr ideas. Suhaib Webb, this video that sparked all of this debate. There's a video of him. You need to watch this video. Go on Muslim Skeptic and look up Suhaib Webb and Yasir Qadhi, and you will see exactly what Brother Daniel has to say. There's a video of Suhaib Webb sitting there talking about that he has a rabbi, that his rabbi is such a close friend, and that his rabbi was there when he got married, and his rabbi called him when he graduated as an imam, and he gets advice, and his close friend, his rabbi. How could these be words coming from an imam? So brothers and sisters, when we understand these views that these so-called imams have been holding, the many problematic statements that they've made, the many kufr ideas that they pushed forth, then now we need to come to terms and come to grips and wake up. Stop using these arguments that they are imam and giants and that they've done good. Let's overlook their mistakes. Yes, they could have done good. Yes, they have knowledge. But you cannot overlook their mistakes. Why? Because these are people with hundreds of thousands, millions of followers. See, if an individual Muslim makes a mistake, let's say he robs someone, he rips someone off, he lies to someone, okay, he can repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and usually that sin is between him and Allah, or he's harmed a few people around him. It's easily, you can rectify that situation. But when an imam has hundreds of thousands, millions of followers, and he's pushing forth problematic aqidah issues, kufr ideas, liberal, secular, democratic, moderate views on the Muslims, corrupting their understanding of Islam, secularizing Islam, then you can't just say, look, this scholar has just made a mistake, let's overlook it. No, because he has so much influence. He's corrupting hundreds of thousands, millions of Muslims. He's corrupting the core of their belief, the core of the understanding of the Quran. So that's why we can't just turn around and say, let's just overlook it. No, we can't overlook it. It needs to be called out. This work is absolutely critical. We need to stop these arguments that these guys are imams, and it's like imams can't be questioned and they can't be spoken to. Yes, of course they can. And this whole argument of, as Suhaib was saying in this video with the confrontation with Daniel, that you never called me beforehand, you never gave me a chance to explain, and so on and so forth, and making excuses for them. This is not some ignorant, normal average Muslim. This is an imam, a scholar. You can't claim ignorance. If you're ignorant of issues, then sit at home, you shouldn't be a scholar. You cannot make grave mistakes like this. It's impossible for you to make these mistakes. So we can't use these arguments anymore. No, you did something publicly, then you're going to be criticized publicly, and we don't always have to ask what your intention was, because that action was done publicly, and that view you held, or that issue that you made, or that mistake has to be dealt with. And to give you an example, the scholars in the past, many times scholars would criticize another scholar. Sometimes that scholar will be dead hundreds of years, but that scholar would still rebut his views and his ideas. And sometimes he'd be very critical. That scholar, how's he doing this? That other scholar is dead. He can't know his intentions. He can't question him, ask him. The point is, it doesn't matter. If you put forth public ideas and views, then they'll be criticized publicly. And sometimes you need to be dealt with very harshly. That confrontation between Daniel and Suhaib looks very harsh. Sometimes people need to be dealt with harshly. Imam Ahmad, rahimahullah, we know the whole fitna that occurred at that time with the Mu'tazila. A group appeared and they started saying that the Quran is a creation of Allah. Imam Ahmad said, no, the Quran is the words of Allah. So the Khalifa brought Imam Ahmad and he imprisoned him and he tortured him for saying that the Quran is the word of Allah. That's the true saying. Now when Imam Ahmad was freed and he went back, he was out of jail. Anytime that he found that an imam or a scholar at his time, when the government asked him, what do you say about the Quran? And that imam and that scholar, under the pressure of torture or imprisonment, said that the Quran is created, and he didn't say that the Quran is the word of Allah, do you know what Imam Ahmad did? Imam Ahmad boycotted that scholar. Scholars he knew, giants of hadith, but he boycotted them. It doesn't matter your intention. You're a scholar. If you do something publicly, what you say publicly, you are influential on millions of Muslims. There's no excuse for you. So Imam Ahmad went to the harsh step of boycotting those scholars. So our brothers and sisters in Islam, this is the reality of what is going on. Don't get bogged down in the details. Don't get bogged down in the methodology. Is Brother Daniel right in the way he does things? Is it too harsh? Is it too much? In the end, look at the bigger picture. There's a threat from inside Islam, and that threat is to reform Islam. And this has been the Western agenda in the last 20 years. And the Western agenda has been to use imams, scholars, to push these liberal, secular, kufr ideas amongst the Muslims, because the Muslims respect the scholars, and this is how these ideas will gain legitimacy. So from behind these scholars, hundreds of thousands and millions of Muslims are becoming secularized, they're accepting LGBT, there's gay Muslims appearing. So it's critical that we have to highlight their mistakes and expose these ideas. And this is something good. It's not a fitna, it's not infighting. It is essential to protect the mind and the creed of the Muslims. So inshallah, this is how we need to understand the issue and view the issue. Jazakumullah khair for listening. Please like the video, comment on the video, and please subscribe to the channel.